will be a theory section on the story enclosure methods and the single price detailed methods to be a little bit more specific. So we've dealt with the single price method of estimations previously, so we're going to look at the single price detailed methods. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have 3 short videos to keep the amount of data down so that you can at least view the videos or the sections a little bit easier. So as I said, we're going to look at the single price detailed methods, and our first method is the story enclosure method that we're going to look at, the parametric method, and then I'm going to look at the elemental analysis method a little bit, but it's more a section or item that we're going to cover in our detailed methods, because it does overlap with the elemental level of measurement. So please just take note that the last section is actually split up into 2 sections, which falls in the single price detailed methods and also in the detailed methods of measurement. So please take note of that. Okay, so the story enclosure method is basically, it was developed in the UK. The aim was to take into account the plan shape, the total floor area, the height and differences of floors, story heights, floor levels below ground, etc. Just basically having a little bit more detail built into the estimate to improve the actual estimate. Basically, story enclosure elements are calculated and adjusted to get a story enclosure area. So there's certain factors that we use to get to a more accurate estimate. So the story enclosure area is then multiplied with the story enclosure tariff. Okay, so we're going to look at this a little bit more in detail just now, but in short, we're measuring the areas of the total areas, and we're multiplying it with the story enclosure tariff, which is your historical rate. So further items are added to get the final estimate, like for instance, again, your external works, any additional items which is specific to the design, etc. Okay. So the story enclosure method, these additional items are additional costs that is not included in the set. Okay, like I just indicated just now. Costs involved in all services, external works, etc. So the idea was that these factors could be used uniformly for all buildings. For instance, foundations will have a factor of times 2. The first floor will have a multiplier of 2.15. The second floor will have a multiplier of 2.3, for instance. So these are just indications. You don't have to worry or memorize all of these factors. These factors will be given to you usually in a question. So, but the main thing is that you can deduce from this is that, and the main thing is certain types of construction areas have certain factors that influence the cost of the building. So for instance, the standard roof will have a multiplying factor of 1. The exterior walls above ground will have 1, and below ground, for instance, times 2. Okay. So the interior walls are excluded, defined as being enclosed in the previous items. Okay, but that is just a definition. You will see how it actually works in practice a little bit later on. Although it is more accurate than the previous method, it never caught on in the UK. So the UK didn't really adopt this method. It was much more adopted in South Africa because of the potential that it posed. So it's still a single price method. The accuracy is dependent on the allocation of factors. So the factors that you use obviously has influence on the accuracy, and you can see that experience is needed to actually use this method. It is an abstract and not a relationship with the building size. Okay, historical data is much more complicated to actually use and in these calculations. Okay, so store enclosure methods applied in South Africa. So in the 1950s, it was implemented in South Africa. It included all floor levels, interior walls, and interior walls. So please take note here. So in the UK, it excluded the interior walls, but in South Africa, it was deemed to be to also calculate this because it had an influence on the cost. So please note that you make note of this little bit of a contradiction in the study notes. Obviously in the study notes it's explained a little bit more, but in the slides you would see that it's excluded above, but in South Africa it was actually included. So we are going to work with as if you have to calculate the interior walls as well. So includes cost structures and basic finishes. Fittings are excluded, like special fittings. Anything else, like for instance air conditioning and that type of thing, you need to consider whether it's included or not. Okay, SET is published by the Bureau of Economic Research in Stellenbosch and can be calculated. So you can actually draw the information of standard multipliers and rates from the Bureau of Research. That is why this method was actually implemented and used in South Africa, because someone with very little historical data can actually use the information published by the BRE to calculate new building estimates. Okay, it is weighted weight area. South Africa research found that factors can be used uniformly to all building types. Okay, so the following is just an example of how it works. So whenever you measure your surface beds, again you measure your square meter area. So you've got a factor of 0.25 times the total area to get your story enclosure area, and then you've got a story enclosure rate that you multiply your building with. So basically you're calculating here first what contribution does the surface beds contribute to the total cost of the building. Okay, what's the weight of that specific area? And then you've got your roofs, so it has a multiplying factor of 0.3 in this case, times the area to get the story enclosure area. Okay, same with your exterior walls and your interior walls to get the total areas. Okay, this is then multiplied with a uniform story enclosure tariff to get to your amounts on this side, and thus your basic building cost on this side. Okay, so the story enclosure method applied in South Africa, the total building cost is determined by adding the story enclosure costs. So expensive structures items, for instance, if you have thicker walls, if you have hollow core walls, or so, it will be an extra over. Or you can have a different factor that you multiply your wall areas with. Obviously accessories is also added, like nice finishes, if for instance it's not standard finishes and you have other accessories that you have to add to the building. Other additions are any other specials and external works. Okay, the uniform rules for the story enclosure area. So this is important, so to know just the standard rules that applies to this method. So physical areas measured and times with your factors, as we've seen. Areas as groups according to different factors. Floor areas are measured according to the rules of significant items subtracted. Exterior walls are measured above surface level, over doors and windows, and only clear openings are subtracted. Okay, so the rule of thumb is you measure your walls over the doors and windows, except if it's a substantial opening. Okay, that is a relative term, and I think you would ask a question, but when is it a big enough opening? The rule of thumb is usually as soon as when you have sliding doors, window, that type of openings, and that's more than a standard double door opening. Okay, roofs are measured over the horizontal level at the wall plate overhangs. So please take note of this. This is very important. Roofs are measured over the horizontal level. Okay, exterior divisions are calculated if layout is known. Then the length of the walls and their heights is measured. So please take note of this. So this is the physical area that the wall will actually cover. So it's the vertical height of your walls. The layout, if the layout is unknown, a typical layout is used. Okay. Using you can see this method can be used if the interior layout is not given. You can actually use standard layouts of previous buildings to get the different areas of your interior walls, for instance. So using a formula, so the percentage of the floor areas, this is the least accurate. So you can use a percentage of your interior walls. You can again use previous buildings if the interior layout is not given yet, and just factor in what percentage that walls are of the interior layout. Okay, so these are the three methods that you can use to actually calculate your interior divisions. Okay, so the advantages: it's more accurate, it takes into account cost variables of buildings, and also calculates the design details. So this method can be used both at the early stage. Yeah, okay, so as per the previous slide, if you don't even have an interior layout, you can use this already and building in factors. Obviously it becomes more accurate the further you go along in the design process. It does not take much more time than the previous methods. Okay, so it's still fairly quick. Historical data can be built up quickly. Okay, so you can easily build up your own story enclosure tariffs as you go along. Okay, the disadvantages is it's large areas that the story enclosure area produces may cause a big effect on the story enclosure tariff. Okay, so you have to be very accurate when doing this. It is still a single price method. Okay, thus many items will not be included, so you will lose some of your detail. The use of uniform factors can lead to inaccurate estimates. As said, it is an abstract amount not related to the spatial planning, usually the tariff that you use. So usually the QSS does tweak that tariff slightly to take into account, for instance, where the project is situated, what type of finishes, and so forth. Okay, so the division of the total cost has little value in cost control and analysis. More difficult than the previous methods. As I mentioned previously, you do need a certain amount of experience to actually implement this method accurately. Okay, so the possible application is still used in several institutions in South Africa. Biggest criticisms remains the use of uniform factors. Okay, adaptation and use of these factors require thorough knowledge and understanding, as mentioned. Real factors can also be calculated through the use of historical data. This can be time consuming. Balance between time spent and accuracy is obviously important. It does remain an approximate method. Okay. Cost, okay, so the cost included, so the story enclosure tariff only includes the basic cost of the building finishes. Thus standard items such as doors, windows are included. So extra over items that still needs to be included is if there's special finishes, any other special fittings, services, external works, electricity, VAT, and then your P's and G's, and obviously contingencies as well, depending on the accuracies. Then the standard items included standard are listed in the following slides. Okay, so I'm just gonna skip through these slides. They are quite standard, so you can go through these slides. It is important to go through these and read through these to have an idea of what type of items are standard within the story enclosure methods that's used. Okay, so for instance, what type of foundation walls is used, concrete surface beds are used, 300 millimeters filling underneath is used underneath your surface beds, usually that type of thing. Okay, so your brick walls usually has a factor of 1, your interior walls usually a factor of 0.5, and so forth. Okay, suspended floors, reinforced concrete slabs with beams and columns, included finishes with plaster and paint with a 25mm screed and vinyl tile finishes. So this is why your first floor factor is a little bit higher than your standard. Okay, good. And that concludes our first slide of our first little section of this lecture.